Welcome to Test-Driven Development and the Gherkin Executor in about 12 minutes. We assume you're already familiar with test-driven development and the red-green refactor cycle. We're just going to show how Gherkin Executor can play into this cycle. Gherkin scenarios represent tests in an implementation-independent format. Let's give an example here. Here's our temperature conversion scenario. We have 3 sets of values, and our calculation convert F to C has in the hashtag 2 tokens that help Gherkin Executor create tests from it. The list of objects and the F and C, which is a data type that shows us that F and C are integers and notes are strings. Well, when we press the translate button, what happens? This gets converted into 2 files. The first, called the test file. It is a unit test in your framework. You'll notice that it creates a glue object. And the glue object is the context for this scenario. All steps within this scenario utilize the same glue object. The Gherkin Executor translates the tables into initialization statements. We have a list of the F and C type objects, and you'll note that they are all strings. And then we call the calculation convert F to C, passing the object list in the glue object. And inside the glue object is our calculation convert F to C. You've got a list of those values that are in string format. You can go around that list, and then also provided is a conversion to the F and C internal object class, where the attributes are of the data type given, integer as for F and C. So each scenario, as we'll see, translates to a single test in the unit framework, and it utilizes the same process for running those tests as any other unit test that you've written. Each row is a variation of the data for the unit under test. And it's equivalent then to a parameterized test. So now the question, so how do you count those tests? Is it 1 test with 3 variations or 3 tests? I'll leave that to you as a philosophical question. So there's 2 approaches that you can take to TDD using the Gherkin Executor. First is a standard red-green refactor. You comment out every row but 1, you process until green, and then you uncomment another row and translate, and then proceed from there. For those who are really in a hurry, you could simply start with all the rows uncommented out, red-green refactor until a row passes, but the test is still going to remain red, and then of course stop when the entire test passes. But if you don't get that far, go back and comment out the rows that are failing so the test passes, and the Gherkin file actually shows what step in the process of your red-green refactoring you have stopped at. Let's see a couple of examples here. Here's a domain term ID. And we've got a rule that says we must have exactly 5 letters and begin with a Q. And once again, we have a list of objects of value, valid type. So our values are listed there, and whether they're valid or not, and notes as to why they aren't valid. And we've got a data statement that shows us that both value and valid are the data type string and Boolean and with the default values. Now, here's our rule ID must have exactly 5 letters. Our glue code is get past that list of values. Now, we're not going to use the internal format here. We're just going to show that we've got 2 strings, the valid value string and the valid string, and we'll use the Boolean to translate that valid into a Boolean. And then we need to invert it, because if the value is valid, then an expected exception should be false, and vice versa. So here's our constructor. We've decided that constructors will be past this string and should throw an exception if it's invalid. So if we construct the object, but we expected an exception and it wasn't thrown, we failed. Or if we got an exception, but we didn't expect an exception, we should fail. Now that's if your environment says that constructors should throw an exception. If you've got another way of translating strings into domain-specific data types, and that's maybe it just returns a Boolean, then you can simply compare it directly without having to catch an exception. Just decided to show you a more elaborate example. Now we can use that the full given when then form for behavior with entities. So here is a list of numbers. And we'll see it's the label value type. The first column is an ID. And as we see from our data statement, that ID actually is of the data type ID that we just validated before. So with this data statement, if that incorrect entry for ID is in that table, then an exception will be thrown. Let's take a look at how this table works. So we've got our values, and we're going to go through each of them. We'll do a convert to the internal format. So one will be converted to an ID data type and the other to an integer. And if no problem, we'll simply add it to our solution. And if there's a problem, we catch an exception and print out an error. Now, whether you want to do this for each of them or the first one, it's up to you. You can decide what algorithm you want to use. We're going to filter the data. And so now, given our list of numbers that we just showed, when we're filtering by, and we'll have a filter value, and notice one thing, transpose in there. What that says is take the table and flip it. So now the headers are on the left side rather than on the top. And this is very useful if it's sort of like you're entering it from a dialog box and you'd be entering these numbers in. So it's that's at least my convention. Input entry has the headers on the left. And then we have the result. The sum should be 4. We've got a data statement for each one of them. The value should be an ID. And the sum is going to have the data type integer. Now, here's a corresponding glue code. We get the first line of the values. We convert it to the internal format, and that's going to be our filter value for the solution. And for the result, we get the first row. We convert it to an internal. We call our solution to get the sum based on the filter value, and then we do on our cert. Now, that's pretty standard. Given some data, we're going to operate on it. What should be the results? There's another way that we can write our filter file. Given our list of numbers, when filtered by an ID, notice we simply have a value in there. Then the sum is a value. If we do not specify list of objects, then a table is passed as a list of strings. In this case, the single entry in the list. So our code underneath, when filtered by ID with a value, will simply get the very first string element in that list of lists, convert it to an ID, and set it as our filter value. For the sum, we'll get it, that value, convert it to an integer, call our solution, and check to see whether it's as we're expected. So to summarize, the Gherkin Executor specifies test data in an implementation-independent format. It uses unit testing frameworks, whatever you're currently using now. A step works like a parameterized test for business rules. Values can be passed individually rather than having to create a data statement for each one. And I'd also suggest checking out a 2D scenario in our tic-tac-toe example. Thank you very much.